Thank you to the Fundación Rafael del Pino for hosting us today. I think there are great expectations around this debate. We look very much forward to a great discussion. Welcome also, and my pleasure to meet Professor Lacalle and Professor Varoufakis. I'm a poor professor of political science. We try to get some attention sometimes doing nasty things in governments, but you know, today the spotlight is on economists and alternatives and the way things work out there. So you know, it's a pleasure. I've read, you know, I've been through your books. Here you are, you know, I think quite interesting. I've discovered, and this would be interesting, that there are things you share. Either, you know, even if you disagree on approaches to things, but there are a very good number of common themes running through things you look at, of course, as economists and so on. So rules of engagement, very simple. We have 40 minutes of a debate. We will have a Q&A session. I'm receiving questions on a chat, which I will put to you at 1:45 approximately. In the meantime, you know, we have good time for a number of exchanges. I like you to have and to run kind of short, direct answers and to engage with each other in the debate for the sake of the public who's watching us. So if I can start with Professor Varoufakis and with your book, before we move to the question of an alternative to capitalism, I mean, this central idea running through your work of there is no alternative, I was wondering whether we should start with a preliminary question: is why should we have an alternative to capitalism? What's wrong with capitalism, Professor Varoufakis?
Capitalism is a remarkable system. There's no doubt about that. In the history of the world, there probably hasn't been anything as remarkable as capitalism. But what makes it so spectacularly important is its contradiction. On the one hand, it has liberated immense forces, creativity, production. It produced huge quantities of wealth. But from the same production line, metaphorically speaking, it has generated newfangled types of depravity, of poverty that is unheard of, that wasn't around before capitalism. These contradictions are not static. They evolve. And in a sense, just to complete my brief answer, it is its worst enemy. We don't have capitalism anymore. I'm trying to make this point in the book, and I also make it in my political life. Especially after 2008, we live in a very strange kind of feudalism with a lot of technology and a lot of money printing by the state. The competitive world that free marketeers always envisaged and supported, you know, the baker, the butcher, and the brewer of Adam Smith, have already been taken over by Amazon, by Walmart, by various corporations. There are very few corporations. They only make money because of state money that is being printed. We have a kind of socialism for the very, very few and a feudalism and austerity for the very many. Already we live in conditions of post-capitalism, and they are not very good. This is not a sustainable system that we have. So I think that both the original supporters of capitalism, of free market capitalism, people that were inspired by Adam Smith, Friedrich von Hayek, and so on, I don't believe they can be happy with what we have. I don't think they can recognize in this capitalism. And we of the left, we see this capitalism as producing not just inequality, just a symptom. It produces depravity amongst the poor and amongst the rich, and an incapacity to use the gadgets that it is creating productively and to save the planet to begin with. So, to conclude, capitalism has already morphed into post-capitalism. But it's not something that a kind of post-capitalism that we have either agreed to together or that seems a good place to be in. So, is there an alternative post-capitalism to the one we have? That is the main question behind my book.
Okay, we will move to the alternative, but before I want to listen to Professor Lacalle, how happy or unhappy are you with capitalism, both as an idea, also as in practical realization as we speak, Professor Lacalle?
I think that first, thank you very much for this opportunity to have this riveting conversation. I think that what we agree with is the absolutely magnificent achievements of capitalism. And I think that what we agree as well with is that there is something that has absolutely nothing to do with capitalism, which is negative, which is cronyism. But cronyism is not a direct consequence of capitalism. It's a direct consequence of statism. The massive money printing and the huge levels of monetary injections and government increases in deficits, etc. Those have very little to do with free markets and capitalism, as we both agree. I think that is correct. However, I think that there's a starting point that I think is important to understand, is that the natural state of the human being is not wealth, is poverty, is abject poverty. And that it's not wealth is not something that is parked somewhere and that we just redistribute. You create wealth out of what is unfortunately the natural state of humanity from the beginning, which is poverty. No? So capitalism doesn't create poverty. Capitalism makes people escape from poverty. What I do agree with Professor Varoufakis significantly is that what we're living right now has very little to do with our concept of a free market economy in which the benefits of markets and the benefits of merit outweigh the negatives that might be created in the process of exchange of goods and services. But that's not due to the capitalist system. It is due to what we have been living. And I would go back a little bit behind that 2008 figure, 2008 year. It's more around the mid-90s when statism takes hold to a maximum effect. The dot-com bubble that he explains with his good friend Kostas in the book, in the absolutely fantastic book, that is the beginning, in my opinion, of what has been a constant cronyist approach from governments with central banks to create an elite that eliminates the possibility of many of the benefits of capitalism to actually thrive.
So, Professor Varoufakis, maybe you want to reply here. Is it the problem? Is it the model? So, therefore, we should go back to capitalism, to what it is, or is it because the problem runs deeper than Daniel Lacalle was mentioning?
Well, look, there's much in what Daniel said that I agree with. So let me just focus as pinpointedly as I can on the two things that I have qualms about, or things that I want to interrogate a little bit further. The first thing is, yes, I said it so myself, and we're in complete agreement that what we now have is cronyism, as Daniel puts it. Could be further away from what Adam Smith had in his mind when he was waxing lyrical about the magical power of the market to operate as a coordinating device, creating public virtues out of private profiteering vices. The question is, Daniel, whether this cronyism is the result of something that has gone wrong with capitalism, or whether it was a natural evolution. So the quick point I want to make here is this. The moment, I'm going even further back in history. You went back to the 1990s. Let me go to the 1890s or the 1900s, which is when the large net worth company began life. The company that produced everything from the electricity power station to the light bulb, Edison, or, Henry Ford. The moment you create that kind of company, the economies of scale and the economies of scope are so huge. The investment that you need in order to create it is so gigantic that you need a mega bank to support it. Mm-hmm. And the mega bank, by nature, by its very nature, creates money out of thin air. And when the going is good, profit roars and growth is immense, like it was in the Roaring '20s. But if you allow bankers to make more and more money by effectively creating money out of thin air, then at some point they will create too much and there will be a bubble. That you can see that from a Hayek perspective, which I suspect is closer to your heart, or a Marxian perspective. It's the same story. The bubble bursts. And then what happens? Then the state comes in, like it did in 2008, and produces mountain ranges of money and saves the banker. And that's when cronyism happens. But is that not inevitable the moment the moment capitalism of its own accord generates the large platform network company? Is there a way of maintaining competitive markets and safeguarding them from, the economies of scale? That's the one point. And the second point, which is much quicker. Look, I don't agree with you philosophically and historically, Daniel, regarding the state of nature. I'm not a Hobbesian, and I don't believe that humanity's state of nature is poverty. Not wealth, yes. Of course, we didn't have wealth. Not wealth, but not the absence of wealth is not poverty. Remember, when the Brits went to Australia, Thomas Cook and so on, when they arrived in Botany Bay, what did they find? They found Aborigines. They were not wealthy. But the Brits, the English, were astonished by the quality of their lives. Those Aborigines, they had communities. They worked 2 hours a day fishing and, catching stuff and picking fruit. The rest of the time, they had rather harmonious relationships. They danced and they painted and they did stuff. They had a lot of leisure. That was a very enriching, prosperous life with very little. Today, Aborigines in Australia, right, they have a lot more money than they had then, but they are in abject poverty, in a kind of poverty that only capitalism can create.
Oh, no, I disagree.
I suspect you don't agree with me, but...
I disagree immensely. To start with, I would disagree with the beautiful life of the Aborigines before the British arrived.
Yeah, the book is about 2025, so let's not spend a lot of time on the Aborigines.
I think I agree. Coming back to the point of the creation of state monopolies, the problem is the state. The problem is not capitalism. Yes, of course, the state creates a monopoly and then creates a system that perpetuates the monopoly. A monopoly cannot exist unless the state perpetuates it or implements it. Because particularly if that monopoly is...
The state did not create Amazon. Amazon is
not a monopoly. Wow. Amazon is not a monopoly.
Of course.
No.
There is no monopoly then, right?
No. Amazon, no. And there's a very simple reason to understand it. It's not the same to be a market leader than to be a monopoly.
It's on the market leader.
It's
a whole ecosystem, Amazon. You get into Amazon, you're stuck into it.
Professor Varoufakis,
Call me Yanis, please. Forget the professor.
No, well, okay. Yanis, this computer that I have, this computer that I'm working with right now, doesn't have Google as an option when you open it from the shop. It doesn't have it. You actually have to download it and actually do a couple of subterfuges to get it. Why do I choose Google instead of the decided upon the system that this machine or the company that has built this machine given to me? Because I decide so. Why do I use Amazon instead of the hundreds of different options? And the what shows that Amazon is not a monopoly is a very simple fact. Is the fact that it arrived from destroying others that were viewed as monopolies. You mentioned one of them, Walmart. The reason why capitalism works, in my opinion, obviously, is because it makes, one, Walmart wise up to the problems that it had created. Two, it gets Amazon to lead the situation. Think about this. Imagine that Walmart was an entity organized by the state. What would happen with the arrival of Amazon? That the state would do three things. The first is to subsidize Walmart. The second would be to try to destroy Amazon. And the third is to fail at both. What capitalism does is allow an alleged monopoly. We don't talk about Walmart as a monopoly anymore. Why? Because Amazon came. And in the future, and I bet you it will happen, and I'm sure we will talk about this, Amazon will be substituted by somebody else, like Google substituted Yahoo.
Okay. Look, let's not rerun.
Yeah, just a brief we can move to the
Schumpeter's theory, right? Because what you are saying, you're describing Joseph Schumpeter's very apt historical analysis of the evolutionary process that kills off one dinosaur by creating another one, which is the market process. Yeah, and you're right. But it's a question of definition. There is no such thing as a monopoly. There is oligopoly. And there is oligopoly power, and there is huge market power that companies like Amazon have. It is a mistake to say that it was the state that created them, because in 1900, remember, I took you back to the time of Thomas Edison. It wasn't the state who created Thomas Edison. Edison emerged spontaneously through the market process, had a dominant power. Why? Because, Thomas Edison invented electricity effectively. He invented the light bulb. He invented everything, even the electric oven. He built the bloody power station. There was no other power station. This is not a critique of Edison. It's a statement of fact that once Edison has the grid, he's a monopoly or a dominant firm.
But he did not have.
It doesn't matter. Look. Overcome the question of the labels. What matters is you have a company that does not have competition. If you wanted to plug yourself into the electricity grid, you had to plug yourself into Edison. He had a huge price cost margin. He used his intelligence, his inventiveness, all that, not state power. At the same time, in order to fund all that, he created mega banks, not through his volition, but the little banks had to amalgamate in order to have the funding capacity to give all this money. They created, bubbles out of thin air, because this is what private banks do, not state banks. And then once you have the collapse, just like the 1990s. In the 1990s, it wasn't the state that created monopolies. In the 1990s, it was the irrational exuberance of the financial sector. All privateers. They built huge quantities of private cash, private capital, also taking the form of CDOs and CDO squares and so on. Thus, the state was not doing that. And then that collapsed, and the state came with cronyism and bailed out bankers. And then suddenly you had the private losses turning into state money. This is the process. But this is the result of capitalism. It's not the result of socialism. Not the result of socialism.
No, it is the result of socialism.
Governments decided to create these mountains.
Sorry, I think the point on your disagreements of monopolies are well understood by now. Let's move to another substantial debate on which you two disagree. In fact, if Professor Varoufakis' book, if his proposals would take, floor, Professor Lacalle will lose his job because financial capitalism and financial markets would also.
I'll find another.
I'm sure he would find another one, but. There are, apart from monopolies, there are two things which are also at the core of your book, Professor Varoufakis, which are labor markets. At some point, you describe in your book paid jobs as slavery, and also financial markets. So it's not only monopolies; it's to labor markets and financial markets, and in your proposal, transcending labor markets and financial markets with this proposal of the first of the book, which I think it is this idea of one employee, one share, one vote system. This is kind of the bulk of the system you are proposing. So I'd like you to debate on this, because I know also Professor Lacalle has also, looked at this in detail. Can you briefly, because I know this is a complex issue, Professor.
Yeah, but I'll do it very briefly, because we're very interested to take questions and I want to listen to what Daniel has to say. Look, I'm not appearing in this meeting, in this debate of ours, as a politician, and I really don't want to drive hard a political line. I wrote this book in mellow moments, in moments when I wanted to escape politics and to escape dogmatism. I want to go against myself as well, because I'm pushing 60. I'm 60 this week, so I'm sick and tired of campaigning. So I hope that Daniel appreciates that. But think of my book as an exercise, as a mental exercise, right? I am a left-winger. I've been a left-winger since I was a young kid. Maybe I was wrong. It doesn't matter. But, so as a left-winger, I was railing against capitalism, whereas Daniel celebrates capitalism. I also celebrated it and railed against it at the same time, because I like this kind of conflict, inner conflict. But we leftists are pathetic, because, we keep criticizing capitalism. And if somebody says to us, okay, so mate, what's the alternative? We have no answer, because my answer is not going to be the Soviet Union, because if there was a Soviet Union, I can assure you, if Daniel and I were in the Soviet Union, he would be in the Politburo, I would be in the Gulag. I would certainly be a dissident, right? I would end up in the Gulag for sure, right? If I lived in China today, I would be in the Gulag. I hate authoritarianism. I'm a liberal. But at the same time, my liberalism goes against all sorts of power, including Amazon, Daniel, including the power of the corporation. And I just wrote this book as a mental exercise. Right. Okay. What's my definition of capitalism? It is a market-based system, which, however, relies hugely on these two markets, the labor market and the market for money, that can never work properly as markets. Now, that's a whole debate as to why that is the case in my view. Okay. Now, can I imagine a market society, a democratic society, a liberal society without a state, without a state overload? Because where Daniel and I probably agree, I hate the state. I don't want the state to decide things for me, right? So if you read my book, there is hardly any state in there. Yeah. So you have corporations on the basis of one share, one vote, one employee. You've got boisterous markets everywhere, including land, which is socialized, but there is a very active, constant auction happening, ensuring that there are no economic rents accruing to anyone, the state or to private individuals. I don't even have many elections in there, because I don't like elections. I think elections are quite oligarchic and oppressive, whereas, I truly believe that from the ancient Athenian model, it's better if you're going to make public decisions, collective decisions, better to have a lottery, sortition, representatives chosen by lot, like a jury system. So I try to imagine, right, how would a world work where you have markets, liberalism, no capitalist accumulation in the hands of the very few at the expense of the very many, and no state power? So the result is the book. I sat down and I created institutions off the top of my head, including an alternative to the International Monetary Fund, a digital currency system run by the central bank, with central banks cooperating with one another, with central banks empowering local communities to have their own digital currencies, without anybody having exorbitant power. And, and I wrote it up as a novel, Daniel. And let me say this, because, I disagree with myself when I think of the world. And if I were to write it as a treatise, I would have to say, okay, this is how this should work. But, if I disagree with myself, I can't really support that. But if I have Iris and I have Costa and I have, other people, Eva, right? They can take different positions and they can argue amongst themselves, and I can be part of all these arguments, and therefore and you see that in the end there is also, I use science fiction as a trick in order to show that I myself, I'm in two minds about the utopia I created. Do I really want to live in that utopia? How far am I prepared to go to live in that utopia as opposed to where I am now? So, I try to write it liberally.
and yet you put something in that utopia, which for Daniel is a big dystopia, which is a big central bank, right, Daniel? Something he wanted to get rid of in this actual world, or he's very critical with.
One of the things that I found about the very, very compelling, hugely entertaining, and thought-provoking book, and the conflict between these characters, Costa in particular, who I love, and Eva, the sort of capitalist, and Iris. One of the things that I found was how much more Yanis has in common with a libertarian view about the world and about the economy than what, as you very well said, the state controlling left-wing view in which we are moving, actually, unfortunately, with all this great reset and things like that. I think that one of the important things in which I find elements of important disagreement comes from this fact of private banks create money from thin air. No, private banks don't create money from thin air. Every single unit of credit that a private bank creates comes from an investment or a deposit.
Yes.
No, it doesn't. The only one, Yanis, that creates money out of thin air is the central bank. The central bank giantly increases its balance sheet.
I disagree very powerfully.
And then through the credit mechanism and by disproportionately and artificially lowering interest rates is pushing financial repression to force banks to lend to a level in which, as we are living in the Eurozone right now, the central bank penalizes banks from being prudent. But in any case, I think that what's absolutely critical about your book, I want to reconduct the discussion to the elements that I find absolutely critical, is the importance that you very well align at around page 50, which is when you talk with your with the character of the anarchist technological company person, is that you have to do two things. Is that you have to try to take away power at the same time as you try to take away the flaws that the market dynamic generates. What I find conflicting in my view is the following: is that by eliminating power throughout the entire chain, all of the power, both from consumers to workers to business leaders to investment, one, you yourself in the book show that there would still be massive inequality because the ones that are able to get their investments agreed by a majority would be hugely remunerated. But the other thing that I find interesting is that by trying to eliminate power, you concentrate power the most, which is actually exactly what governments and central banks have done with massive monetary and fiscal intervention. By trying to generate a system that extracts wealth out of savers and real wages to give it to the indebted and the government, what ends up happening is that you create an even higher level of monopoly. Because if you think about it, in your book, you have to find, which I find very, very interesting, you have to find a way for the different central banks to work in a sort of unleadered way in order to avoid what would inevitably be a massive inflationary environment in which the huge creation of artificial money from those central banks would be immense, because when you have one share, one person, one in one company, what ends up happening, think about this, in the technology company that you mentioned in the book, it makes absolute sense because everybody's working more or less on the same thing. Now think about this in a refining company or in an auto company. The Elon Musk of that company would be hugely disincentivized to look for innovation, because the vast majority of people would want to invest in what? In building more cars, no matter what. So the problem that you find is that the element that capitalism allows, that free markets and that a competition in financial market gives, which is the possibility of your character Kostas. No, your character Kostas finds himself in an unfortunate position and is able to make himself not wealthy but enormously wealthy, using market actions and market tools in order to achieve his dreams. But if once you eliminate all of them, you have concentrated all of the power in a central bank that you have to bet, and you have to be extremely, extremely careful that it's not going to generate the massive incentive to do what central banks do, which is to erode the purchasing power of savings and of wages.
Okay.
It's funny you should say this, because we live in a world where the central bank controls bloody everything. And they are not even eroding.
You won't find me complaining about that.
But they are not eroding anybody's savings, because there is absolutely no inflation. What they do is they decide centrally who has power and who doesn't. But allow me to answer your very interesting points with 3 objections, 3 points, 3 counterpoints. The first one concerns power. Remember that the whole point of Adam Smith is that the fact that every entrepreneur is trying to maximize their profit and to seek maximal power is what ensures that nobody has any power. This is the unintended consequences behind the invisible hand. So, he was a moral philosopher. He had students of moral philosophy at the University of Glasgow, and they were asking him, Professor, how can you possibly support these, nasty entrepreneurs out there who are, using their power in order to become, gigantic sources of authority? And, they use child labor, because they did use child labor in the River Clyde back then, up in Glasgow. And, you are a moral philosopher and you're supporting them. His argument was that the beauty of the market is by setting one against the other. Competition, as long as it works. Absolutely. As long as nobody has market power, competition effectively, as if by an invisible hand behind their backs, is guiding them to do God's work. He didn't use God because he was an atheist, but, that's what he meant. Private vices leading to public virtues. So, don't accuse me of trying to imagine a world where there's no power, because this is Adam Smith's defense of capitalism. Capitalism works, according to Adam Smith, to the extent that nobody has power over prices. That we are price takers in economics 101 terms. So there, we have to be on the same. I'm trying to create a blueprint where nobody has power. Everybody's seeking power, but nobody has it. And, that's also what free marketeers should be wanting, unless they have renounced Adam Smith. That's point number 1. Point number two. Look, Elon Musk is, he's a genius. He's an entrepreneur. He sits there down for 5 minutes. He has 20 ideas, of which 3 are good, 17 are bad, right? And some of them are very lucrative. All strength to him. I don't really believe that what motivates him to innovate is, the 100 billion that he made in paper wealth during the pandemic. I really don't believe that. The idea that he's going to make a lot of money, right, if his innovations work. Of course, this is a very powerful incentive to him. But, 1 billion would have done it, or 2. He didn't need to make 200. The 200 that he has made, Daniel, he's made because of the central bank, not because of his innovation. Absolutely. The only reason why you had $1 trillion added to the wealth, to the stock value of the large, the Jeff Bezoses and the Elon Musk of the world is because of the money printing by the Fed. So you cannot, on the one hand, be against the money printing of the Fed and then celebrate the huge quantities of wealth that Elon Musk got on the basis that it was all deserved and he got it because of his innovation. And so the point I'm making is that, look, I don't know about you, I like money. The more money, the better. I have the ancient Athenian view that more money is fantastic to have, the more the better, but I wish that I didn't have to do anything to get it. It's a very dirty business trying to get money. Money is fantastic like happiness, as a byproduct of creative work. So, you do creative work but the byproduct is happiness and money. That's fantastic. But if you seek happiness, if you seek money, then you are a sad bastard, as the English say. So in the kind of corpus syndicalist corporation that I'm referring to, that I'm sketching out in the book, there's plenty of room for innovation. There's plenty of room for cooperation, for leadership. Because remember, everybody goes to everybody else and says, look, I have this idea. You want to work with me on this project? And you know that if the company makes money, then there is this process of voting for bonuses, for distributing bonuses. There is a game that colleagues play with one another. And they all have an incentive because it's based on the Eurovision Song Contest idea that you give grades, marks, not to your own song, but to the song of everybody else. Right? And that allows for inequality. I'm not against inequality. I really am not against inequality. I'm a Marxist who has written a paper back in the year 1999, I believe, in a Marxist scholarly journal called Science and Society, one of the oldest Marxist economics journals in the United States. And the title of it, Daniel, you'll be pleased to know, was Against Equality.
I know.
Right? So, I'm against exploitation. I'm against rent. And my view is that most of the wealth that accumulates today in this techno-feudalism that we live, it's not even capitalism, in my view, is rent. It is not reward for clever thinking, for innovation, for application, for parsimony, for good stuff. And finally, and here's the third point with which I shut up. The process that you described, where illicit power is concentrated in the central bank, is the natural repercussion of bankers doing exactly the opposite of what you said. It is, I'm astonished that you should say that every dollar or every euro or every yen that created that is lent, that becomes credit, corresponds to somebody else's savings.
No, I didn't say that. No, I didn't say that.
Daniel, let him finish because we need to.
I'll put it very bluntly, Daniel. It comes out of thin air. You get a loan for $1 million from the Bank of America. All that happens is somebody in the Bank of America types in $1 million, right, in your bank account, and then you transfer it to other people. Now, as long as it's a bit like, putting your hand into the future, stealing from the future value that has not been created yet, bringing it to the present. If that investment works out and you repay the future with interest, that's fine. But at some point, this doesn't happen and there's a bubble and collapses. And that gives exorbitant power to the central bank because it steps in to prevent a social crisis, a huge crisis, and then you have the cronyism that you hate.
Okay, we have to stop here, just Daniel, and then because if not, we will run out of time. Obviously, we could spend hours here. So let me just give the floor to the people who've been patiently, watching this and also want to have their say. I'll try to group questions so you can have a final go, and then also put some of your pending things in there, so then Vicente can bring this to an end in time. There are a couple of questions about still, China. You mentioned that Professor Varoufakis. What is Antonio Ruiz mentions? What is your view about communist capitalist China as he depicts this, and also why, despite all the suffering and damage and poverty caused by communism, is still popular, or at least has a good press in some countries. Maybe, these two questions would go for you. Then there is a question for, two questions for Daniel on, you mentioned that Amazon would be replaced by a big, by another firm. But why is it the case that we cannot have competition among these big companies without probably, as Professor Varoufakis was saying, by one replacing the other? Because why cannot we have a healthy market on the GAFA sector? And then to you as well, Daniel, from Carlos, why is it that capitalism cannot manage with negative externalities like climate change, resource consumption, or social exclusion? Let's take these these two questions. Of course, Yanis, and if you want to also to pick up on any of the questions I put in Daniel's lot, but let's try to answer these two set of questions, and then we can have a final word from each of you. So, Professor Varoufakis, please go ahead.
No, Daniel, I just spoke. It's Daniel.
Okay, Professor Lacalle, please.
I'm going to be very, very quick. First, and I want to clarify first, I didn't say that banks create money, one saving, one lent. No, it's that every unit that is lent is going to an investment or something that is likely to be repaid. Because if banks created money out of thin air, none of them would crash or go bankrupt, obviously. The ones that create money from thin air are central banks. And even in systems in which you don't have private banks, or in which private banks are controlled by the state, it is the state through the central bank that increases liquidity and reduces interest rates artificially in order to use banks as a tool. The competition between technology firms. We are looking at technology today from a perspective that is called presentism. We look at them today and we say, wow, this huge market power, and they control everything. No, we forget, where's Yahoo? Where's WorldCom? Where are all of the companies that were supposed to be inexpugnable and impossible to take away? There are no barriers of entry. The moment that Amazon, Google, Facebook, you name it, and some of them are already going through the process of losing their market share, etc. The moment that they lose their competitive advantage, it's not just that they will fade away like a large corporate like General Motors or Exxon did. No. It's that they will be wiped out. But anyway, and they will, by the way, and we will talk about this in a few years. I always say to my students and everyone, think about Yahoo, think about WorldCom and all of these companies. The other point, capitalism not only can manage externalities like climate, social exclusion, etc. It's the only way to manage them, because you can have two models, a profit-based economy or a loss-based economy. There's no other thing. There's no such thing as a zero-based economy. So the problem that you have is that if you try to address climate, social exclusion, or other externalities from the perspective of a loss-based economy, the impact that you get on reducing those factors is inexistent, and the impact that you get on jobs and on growth is monumental. The only way in which you address climate, social exclusion, etc., is through technology and competition, which is exactly where Yanis and I completely agree. And that's where I finish.
Professor Varoufakis, you can take issue also with these things. And so in 5 minutes, we can be out, 5-6 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, I'll be quick. China. China is a remarkable experiment. It's a hybrid. Let's not forget, before we talk about China per se, that two things saved capitalism in 2008, or maybe transformed it to what I call techno-feudalism, but nevertheless, made amends for the crash of 2008. One was the Federal Reserve and all the credit swap lines that it gave to the European Central Bank, to the Bank of England, to the Swiss Central Bank, and so on. One was the Fed, and the other was China. They cranked up investment to 50%, a ludicrous level of investment. But that created the aggregate demand that the German Mittelstand needed in order not to collapse completely, and also the United States economy. It is a planned economy, but then again, so is the United States economy. The differences between the American economy and the Chinese economy are very interesting, but they are grossly overstated. They both rely, the American economy relies to a very large extent on the military-industrial complex. It relies on a very large extent on the New Deal institutions like Social Security and so on. You can see now that with Biden, this is given another spin. China is channeling investment in a particular way. The other thing, which I think is, I tell this to my British friends when they say, "Oh, but China is not democratic." I said, "What do you mean?" John Stuart Mill, the greatest liberal of the 19th century, was against democracy because his argument was that, you need freedom to trade, freedom of exchange, the rule of law, and certainly not the hoi polloi deciding what happens. So, this is not far away from the Chinese Communist Party's view, right? Freedom of the market, but let's not talk about democratic decision-making. But let me make just some quick points. Look, Daniel, we have a very different conception of money. That is the problem, you see. When you say that only the central bank creates money out of thin air, it seems to me that you're tending towards more towards a kind of theory of money that looks at money as a commodity, and I tend more towards a theory of money that looks at money as a form of debt. This is a conceptual difference that we have. Now, you talked about Yahoo and so on. Where is Yahoo? Look, the fact that dinosaurs become extinct and then another mammal comes up like, Homo sapiens, and dominates, does not mean that when the dinosaurs are alive, that there's no dominant dinosaur, or that when, we have the Homo sapiens period of domination of the earth, that we don't have a dominant one. We will probably become extinct. We're a kind of virus on this planet. And you know what? You're right. Technology is the only solution to climate change. There's no doubt. Investment in technology. But I very much doubt that markets can provide it, because they do not have the capacity to value that which doesn't have a price. So if you want to think of...
Neither does government.
Oh, well, the government does. It's called, think of public health systems. They are not operating on the basis of, you say, loss or profit. The National Health Service in Britain...
No, they are loss-based.
No, they're not.
Oh,
because the benefit, the positive externalities of, living in Britain as opposed to living in the United States, and not having to worry about going bankrupt if you are uninsured and you get cancer. That is a major benefit. You are not pricing it because you assume that what has value must have a price. But I disagree with that.
No. Sorry.
We have to disagree on these things.
Of course, we have to agree.
We're not going to agree on it.
The beauty of this is what we agree on, Yanis. The beauty of this is what we agree on, which is surprising for a lot of the people that are watching us today, a lot. But the point that I make is, first, the fact that dinosaurs existed and disappeared does not mean that they had massive power when they existed. There's absolutely nothing bad about market leaders. There is absolutely nothing bad about market leaders as long as they are not monopolies implemented by the state that give bad service, bad goods and service, or at bad prices for political control. The problem, I think, where our views align is incentives. And I think that the point that we get to is that no matter where cat and mouse situation or chicken and egg situation of who started first, the more that every single imbalance in the economy is tried to be solved via huge injections of liquidity and mass reduction in rates, money creation is never neutral. Money creation disproportionately benefits the first recipients of money and disproportionately impacts negatively the savers and the real wages. You say that there is no inflation. However, there is rising discontent all over the world because of the rising cost of living.
Because of deflation. because of deflation, not because of inflation.
Well, I would not only disagree, but I just had
negative interest rates are creating contempt.
I actually just had an interview with Argentina in which they were enjoying the benefits of 40% inflation every year. No, absolutely not. In fact, if anything, in the Eurozone, what we have been saved by is by having moderate inflation. By the way, there is absolutely no deflation. You look at rent, look at so many costs of goods and services, look at the non-replicable goods are rising faster than real wages and faster than disposable income. But the point that we agree on is that the more that you have one single entity that aims to solve each and every single problem through massive intervention, the worse the outcome from the crisis. And the point that finally that I get to is that when you get to a situation in which the lender of last resort and the purveyor of goods of last resort, which should be the central bank and the government, become the lender of first resort.
Well, that's because of the failure of the private sector.
That's the failure of the private sector?
If I made you chairman of the Fed tomorrow, you have no alternative than to keep printing money in order to keep afloat the zombies of the financial sector or the corporate sector.
Because
otherwise they will collapse.
The fact that
unless you live in a crashing burn.
I disagree with that.
Professor,
another thing is that there is another thing is that
Daniel, do you know what my problem is?
Yeah.
I'll tell you what my problem is.
Yes.
I'm more liberal than you are. And I can't live with that.
You're more liberal. I'm more libertarian.
Liberal than you are. Yeah. I'm more libertarian than you. Because, I fear power both from the state and from Amazon. You don't fear the power of Amazon. I do. I fear the power of Microsoft. Remember back, there were two great or decent word processing software pieces. Yeah. It was Word and WordPerfect. WordPerfect was far better than Word. Microsoft bought WordPerfect and killed it. Now, that is a loss of productivity. It's a loss of a good product because of the exorbitant power of Bill Gates and Microsoft. This is just one example. Walmart destroyed all sorts of a whole ecosystem of small producers that were producing much better quality stuff than Walmart, that came in with the policy of cheapness and just, reducing the quality of everything. So I fear about both state power and corporate power.
I think we have to stop, Daniel, sorry, we have to stop here on this note I think it was a beautiful end by Professor Varoufakis applying for the position in the chair of the Federal Reserve. On that note, I think we can close the debate. There are thousands of things we could continue discussing. There are two things we didn't show up, which probably are useless for you. One is the European Union, the other is social democracy.
I don't want to talk about social democracy. I will lose the will to live.
So that's why we would agree so much on that one.
There you are.
Precisely. I didn't want to raise the debate on these two things because I imagine you would agree also on that. So let's leave it here. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your time. I think it's been a wonderful discussion.